Let's pick up where we left off in the last example and change it around so that we can drag a rectangle using some decision making. Instead of drawing a line in the begin method, I'm going to draw a filled rect, and I'll just make up some coordinates, and it'll be 30 wide and 70 high. So if we run this, let's see what we have to work with. The rectangle shows up on the screen and it says nothing clicked yet. Now the behavior is still the left and right side, and what I want to do is change this to decide whether or not I clicked inside or outside of the rectangle. So in my on mouse click, I need to access that filled rectangle. So I need to keep a reference to it in a property variable. And I'll store that in the begin method. So now down inside of my on mouse click, instead of using a relational operator to have a Boolean expression that compares two numbers and gives us a true or false answer, I can use a function that's part of the filled rect class. So the filled rect class has a method called contains, and the contains method accepts a point and it determines if that point is within the object. So the way I use this is I want to ask my rectangle, and I use the dot notation and the contains method, and I pass the point that I received as a parameter to my on mouse click as the argument to my contains method. So the myRect.contains method will return a true or false value, which I can then use to say rectangle clicked or not clicked in the else case. So now if I click inside, I get rectangle clicked, and outside I get not clicked. Good. So let's change this a little bit more so that we can drag the rectangle around. So instead of having some text display saying clicked and not clicked, I'm going to change this to on mouse press. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep track of whether or not I've pressed inside of the rectangle. So I'll keep track inside of a Boolean variable. So we can start out with a initial condition of false. So we'll start out that we have not clicked on it initially, and then when we press down, instead of saying some text thing, I'll say rectangle pressed is true, and then otherwise we'll say rectangle pressed is false. So we're going to use that now in our drag methods. So we'll have a on mouse drag, and what this method's going to do is essentially read this and decide what to do with it. This is similar to what we call the two-state behavior when we were working in Alice. So we can use our Boolean variable directly as the condition in our if statement. So if the rectangle is pressed, then we'll do some things. And otherwise, essentially, we're not going to do anything here. So what we want to do is move the rectangle from the last point to the current point. So I need to keep track of one more thing. So I'll keep track of the previous point, which is a location. And when the mouse point goes down inside the rectangle, we'll have to keep track of this. So we can say the previous point equals that point. That's the parameter to the method. And what we want down here is to do a few things. We want to find the difference between the x and y locations of the previous point and the current point. So I can make some local variables that I'll use inside of this method to say dx is the difference between the previous point's x location and the current point's x location. And dy is the difference between the previous point's y location and the current point's y location. Now all I need to do is move the rectangle, so I can move my rect by the dx and dy. Now the last thing I need to do is make sure I update my previous point. So the previous point is equal to now the current point. So we're almost done. Let's see if this works. So if I press down and drag, I'm moving the wrong direction. Something's not quite working right. I'm moving the opposite way it should. So what I actually needed to do was swap around the order of this. So I need the current point minus the previous point. Now when I click and press and drag, the rectangle moves with me. Good. So it looks like it works very well so far. Now I've already clicked and dragged. If I press and drag over here, nothing happens. Good.